Hello, this is David Frothingham, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 29th, 2026 issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The top headline on today's front page reads, "Why Iran is in no rush to return to talks with the United States." Amid a reprieve in the fighting, Iran's leaders are betting that they can endure more pain than President Trump can, and have leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, analysts say. By Yeganeh Terbati. Iran's skies have been free of the sound of explosions and airstrikes for the past several days, after a bout of renewed fighting with the United States. But Iranian officials say they have not agreed to a ceasefire and are in no hurry to hold direct talks with American negotiators. Instead, Iranian officials insist that they are in a position of strength, military leaders boast of battlefield successes, and diplomats dismiss U.S. claims that they are eager to return to negotiations. The rhetoric coming from Iran indicates that its leaders are comfortable with the state of limbo with the United States, something between peace and full-fledged war, believing that they can handle renewed conflict and that they have leverage over President Trump. The priority for Iran seems to be gaining recognition of its control over the strategic Strait of Hormuz waterway, a concession that the United States has been unwilling to make. Despite the bluster, the uncertainty is a challenge for Iran, analysts say. Fighting could break out at any time, a final settlement appears distant, and Iran's economy is almost certain to deteriorate further because of instability, wartime destruction, and a U.S. naval blockade. Ramazan Sharif, a former spokesman for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the ideological military force that has solidified its control over Iran during the war, said on Sunday that Iran's enemy had faced strategic defeat at every step, Iranian state media reported. Iranian diplomats have reacted with more restraint to the pause in the fighting over the past few days, after 2 weeks of trading attacks, but there is little hint that they are in the mood for compromise. At present, what exists cannot be described as a ceasefire, the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai said at a news conference on Monday. Mr. Trump said on Monday that Iran had asked for a pause to meet for talks and that the two sides were engaged in discussions. "We're talking right now," he told reporters aboard Air Force One, adding that there was a good chance a new round of diplomacy with Iran could yield a breakthrough. Last week he said at the White House they want to meet desperately to try and end it. Mr. Baghai denied that there were any negotiations with the United States currently. Iran faces stark internal divisions over diplomatic contacts, with hardliners opposed to resuming negotiations and denouncing the elected government, which is engaged in talks in pursuit of a ceasefire. Iran's negotiations, Mr. Baghai said, were with Oman over management of the Strait of Hormuz, the critical waterway for oil and gas shipments that Iran effectively shut down after being attacked by the United States and Israel in late February. Quote, "They believe that time is on their side, that they can absorb pain and pressure more successfully than Donald Trump can, and that ultimately he will agree to a deal that fits their demands without any concessions from their side," said Gregory Brew, a senior analyst on Iran at the Eurasia Group, a political risk advisory firm. The recent resumption of fighting caused oil prices to surge, raising prices at the gas pump for American consumers. Oil prices had fallen sharply after the United States and Iran paused their attacks. Mr. Trump faces a painful dilemma in deciding his next step on Iran. The New York Times reported on Saturday that private U.S. deliberations over the war have focused on the Pentagon's shrinking stockpiles of air defense munitions, making a return to war high risk. That is just one of the several concerns for U.S. officials, along with the danger of a widening war, the effect on Gulf allies, and global energy supplies. "It is difficult to know the state of Iran's missile supplies," said Farzan Nadimi, a senior fellow with the Washington Institute and an expert on Iranian military affairs. Iran is believed to have produced between 700 and 1,000 solid propellant ballistic missiles between the brief war with Israel in June 2025 and the outbreak of the current war, he said. Its output of liquid fuel and cruise missiles is less quantifiable, he added. Open source information on Iran's missile production can be fragmentary, Mr. Nadimi said. That opacity means that less is known about how Iran would fare in a return to a full-blown war. Still, Iran does not want to return to a full-scale war that involves both U.S. and Israel, and also one with open-ended prospects, he said. Iranian officials have hinted in recent interviews that they agreed to the ceasefire partly because missile stocks were running low or were not fully accessible, he added. Iran is at risk of overreaching, Mr. Bruce said. For Mr. Trump, escalating war could be more appealing than accepting a deal that gives Iran control over the strait, he added, and other countries are unlikely to accept tolls on ships. There is scope for both sides to de-escalate if Iran can accept a compromise arrangement for the future of the waterway. The next headline on today's front page reads, At Graham's Farewell, a Glimpse into Power in Trump's Washington. The political evolution of Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina senator, both captivated and confused many of his old friends, but reflected the changing order in the nation's capital. By Peter Baker. Peter Baker is the chief White House correspondent and first met Lindsey Graham in 1998 while covering Bill Clinton's impeachment. He reported from inside Washington National Cathedral. When the first of the three amigos died, the service at Washington National Cathedral felt like a repudiation of President Trump, who was not invited and not welcome. When the last of the amigos departed this life, the service felt like an affirmation of Mr. Trump, who was not only invited but led the tributes. From John McCain to Lindsey Graham, two members of a trio of senators once so close that they compared their friendship to a marriage, the stark difference between the two services in the same majestic cathedral 8 years and worlds apart exemplify how much has changed in the nation's capital. It may not have been Donald Trump's Washington in 2018, but it most assuredly is in 2026. The pomp and circumstance farewell to Mr. Graham, the longtime Republican senator from South Carolina who died at 71 this month, showcased the current power structure. Until now, Mr. Trump had never been asked to deliver a eulogy for any of the presidents, senators, and cabinet secretaries memorialized at the cathedral. But there he was on Tuesday in the iconic stone lectern extolling one of his most important converts in a city that has likewise had to accommodate itself. Quote, For more than 30 years, nothing of consequence happened in this capital without Lindsey Graham knowing about it, Mr. Trump told a few thousand mourners. Nothing of significance happened anywhere in the world without Lindsey Graham having a view on it. And no bill became law in the most exceptional republic in human history without Lindsey Graham having a say in it. It was that level of influence that appealed to Mr. Graham, who had once denounced Mr. Trump as a racist, xenophobic, ignorant, unqualified demagogue, only to make himself into the president's closest ally on Capitol Hill. Neither Mr. McCain, a Republican senator from Arizona, nor Joseph Lieberman, a Democratic senator from Connecticut, and the third of the amigos, could bring themselves to accept Mr. Trump, but Mr. Graham did. That was a theme of the recollections of Mr. Graham, whose political evolution alternately captivated and confused many of his old friends. So much so, in fact, that Sean Hannity, the Fox News evening host and conservative favorite who hosted the senator regularly on his show, used his tribute at the cathedral to thank Mr. Trump for embracing and empowering Mr. Graham. Mr. President, he would be so honored that you are here today, Mr. Hannity said, addressing Mr. Trump from the lectern. He loved you as he loved his country. He loved the times you played golf. I heard about every single solitary hole. He loved the meals that you shared. He loved the late-night conversations you had. And, Mr. President, you gave him the greatest gift of his life, and that was a front-row seat at the highest levels of history in the making. It meant the world to him." End quote. Mr. Graham was a singular character in Washington and a giant of the United States Senate, as Mr. Trump put it, and a force of nature, as Mr. Hannity said. But those are phrases that would apply to many whose caskets have laid in the cathedral over the years. Unlike most of them, Mr. Graham stood out as a vivid personality, always pithy, often insightful, sometimes biting. He simply did not fit the cookie-cutter Washington mold. He had little time for staid, heavily edited speeches and all the time in the world for freewheeling Sunday talk shows. He liked to riff. He liked to tease. He liked to surprise and provoke. He could be funny and angry, charming and exasperating, sometimes all at once. Vice President J.D. Vance remembered Mr. Graham as a larger-than-life figure who, despite being among the shorter senators, carried himself with a certain swagger. He swashbuckled in his He swashbuckled in with his jacket open like he was 6'5", Mr. Vance said at a ceremony in the Capitol before the cathedral service. Later in the day, Mr. Trump said that virtually everyone, Republican or Democrat, liked Lindsey, then stopped and corrected himself. Well, not everybody, he acknowledged. But it sounds good. Not everybody. He was a tough cookie. Among those who did like him were Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, both of whom relied on Mr. Graham to lobby for their wartime causes with Mr. Trump, and both of whom flew across the ocean to honor him. His rise from a pool hall to the halls of Congress was an inspiring Made in America success story that helped fuel his 31 years in the House and Senate. Never married, he was devoted to his office and managed to integrate himself into the Capitol without shedding his South Carolina accent or roots. Senator Graham was very Washington, if you know what I mean, the Reverend Tim Tate, the Senator South Carolina pastor, said in his homily, but he was also very small town. While never having children of his own, Mr. Graham was devoted to his younger sister, Darlene Graham, who has now been appointed to his Senate seat, and her family. Emily Boggs Robert, his niece, recalled how he probably saved my life once by getting help when she lost consciousness after brain surgery. She said she had just told her mother that she was pregnant on the day her uncle died, and her mother promptly picked up the phone to call and share the good news. She never got to tell him, Ms. Roberts said, but I have no doubt that he knows and is thrilled. Mr. Graham had a puckish sense of humor. We laughed nonstop, Mr. Hannity recalled. We laughed often about many of you in this room. He allowed that Mr. Graham was unpredictable, and so it was a bit risky to have Lindsey on your TV show. But Senator Graham was great for ratings, not to mention a shameless self-promoter. Mr. Hannity tried to push back against what he called the false criticism that Mr. Graham was a warmonger, as he put it. The truth was the opposite. But even Mr. Trump did not buy that. He never saw a war he didn't like, the president said. That was a worldview that Mr. Graham shared with Mr. McCain during their years as allies, supporting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that they saw as important for the nation's security. But they split over Mr. Trump. When Mr. McCain died, his memorial service was marked by a chorus of barely veiled criticism of Mr. Trump from his daughter and two former presidents. It was striking that 8 years later the service for Mr. Graham, who made his mark as a national security hawk, leaned so heavily not only toward Mr. Trump, but toward the social conservative side of the party. None of his comrades from the military, where he served in the Air Force, Air National Guard, and Air Force Reserves for 33 years, or his allies from foreign policy fights, were asked to speak. The three readings were delivered by Reverend Franklin Graham, the evangelical minister, Tony Perkins, president of the Conservative Family Research Council, and Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. Nor were any Democrats included in the program, despite Mr. Graham's long record of trying to work across the aisle on issues like immigration. There was a time when he was a member of every Senate gang, as Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, put it after his death, every bipartisan gang of 8 or gang of 14 that tried to forge a deal on some stalemated issue. But that was another era. There are no bipartisan gangs anymore, and Mr. Graham's alliances with Democrats were more sparing. His last major endeavor with the Democrats and Republicans was legislation to further punish Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Legislation he sponsored along with Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut. A bipartisan group of senators announced before the service that they had reached a deal on that bill and planned to bring it to the floor for a vote later in the day in Mr. Graham's honor. Many Democrats attended the services on Capitol Hill and at the cathedral, a testament to their lasting personal affection for Mr. Graham and a nod to the rituals of the Capitol. Not on hand, however, was former President Joseph R. Biden, Jr., who was once close to Mr. Graham but grew estranged when the senator joined Mr. Trump's attacks on his son, Hunter Biden. It said something, too, about the pecking order of Mr. Trump's Washington that his son Eric Trump and daughter-in-law Laura Trump were given seats in the front row along with the president and vice president, while the secretaries of State and Defense, Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, were relegated to the second row. Also on hand was Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh, whose confirmation to the Supreme Court was secured in part by Mr. Graham, who became his most passionate defender during Senate hearings in 2018 when the nominee was accused of sexually assaulting a fellow student during high school. Mr. Trump used the occasion to share stories, including the time when he and Mr. Graham ran against each other in 2016 for the Republican presidential nomination. At one point, in an act of revenge for some harsh things that Mr. Graham had said, Mr. Trump gave the senator's personal mobile phone number out publicly. Quote, "His phone totally. I don't know what he did with it, but it exploded," Mr. Trump recalled. "That was the beginning of a friendship in a way. But it was Lindsay who had the last laugh because while I blew up his phone, for one day, we became great friends, and Lindsay did not stop calling me for the next 10 years." End quote. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next headline on today's front page reads, "How Meta Got Everything It Wanted in a Secret Louisiana Data Center Deal." A Times examination details how the Silicon Valley giant used private talks with local officials to start a project big enough to cover nearly 6 square miles. By Eli Tan and Maureen Farrell. A Louisiana state legislative committee was about to consider a bill in April 2024 when Richard Nelson, the state's revenue secretary, received an urgent message from Governor Jeff Landry. Get the bill passed, the newly re-elected Republican governors told him, because they needed it for something else. Mr. Nelson walked across a room in Baton Rouge's towering state capitol to the bill's author, Chris Turner, a Republican state representative. "Hey, we need to hijack your bill," Mr. Nelson told Mr. Turner. "I can't really tell you what it's about. All I can tell you is that it's important." Mr. Turner agreed. The bill had started out as a tax rebate for fiber optic equipment, but when it was voted on by the State House of Representatives less than 2 months later, it had become a tax rebate for equipment used in data centers. Mr. Turner helped land the largest development in Louisiana's history, a $50 billion data center for the Silicon Valley giant Meta that planners say could cover about 6 square miles and use 7 times as much energy as New Orleans. Meta wanted the rebate to build its data center in Richland Parish, an impoverished farming community in Louisiana's northeast corner. The tech company also needed a secret deal done quickly, and state officials were eager to oblige. Rewriting the bill was a critical part of a 9-month process that Meta used to cut deals behind the scenes, avoid local opposition, and offload financial risk, according to interviews with more than 40 people and a review of corporate filings, tax records, property records, and meeting transcripts. The secrecy was agreed to by nearly everyone involved, from utility executives to the governor's office to a local elected official who knew about the talks with Meta and sold 300 acres of his own property for the project. The upshot was a deal that was nearly ironclad for Meta because everyone else took on most of the potential downside. Mark Zuckerberg, Meta's chief executive, also gave his company an escape hatch to get out of it years before its partners. Those partners included Entergy Louisiana, the state's largest power company, Blue Owl, a Wall Street investment firm, according to public statements from the companies and investor documents. If Meta should pull out of the project because of a natural disaster, Blue Owl and its investors could be stuck with tens of billions of dollars in debt. Should Meta exit its lease early for other reasons and pay high penalties for doing so, Entergy and its customers could wind up saddled with higher cost. Adding to their risk, insurance companies would not fully insure Meta's facility because of its size and location in the Louisiana Delta floodplains. The New York Times examination shows for the first time how Meta used secrecy and speed to pave the way for its giant project, which it calls Hyperion. At a pivotal moment for the AI boom, Hyperion could be a blueprint for other companies intent on avoiding local opposition in order to get massive data centers built fast. Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and others are expected to spend more than $1 trillion on data centers in the coming years. But some communities are pushing back because they are worried about water use, high electricity rates, disruption by construction, and the endless hum of giant computing centers running throughout the night. From January through March, construction of 75 data centers worth an estimated $130 billion was delayed or stopped by local or political roadblocks, according to Data Center Watch, a project run by the AI research firm 10A Labs. The tax breaks, backroom negotiations, and lack of public input do not appear to have broken any laws, but they raise ethics questions about the state's negotiations with Meta, said Dane Ciolino, a professor of legal ethics at Loyola University New Orleans College of Law. Quote, "It goes to the basic public confidence we need to have that state power is not being used to enrich insiders," he said. Meta executives said that Hyperion, which will be the company's largest data center, was critical to their AI ambitions and that they envisioned years of investment in Louisiana. Quote, "We're committed to the state, we're committed to Richland Parish, and we're committed to putting the best compute infrastructure in the world into a single location," said Rachel Peterson, Meta's head of data centers. Ashley Settle, a Meta spokeswoman, said in a statement that it was unfair to say its Louisiana deal was made in secret, as it went through established state and local economic development processes and approvals, with oversight from local tax and development boards. State officials are proud of the deal and believe the economic benefits will be worth it. That includes 1,000 permanent jobs, thousands of temporary ones, and tens of millions of dollars in tax revenue. Sales tax totals in Richland Parish have already jumped 2,000% since construction started, which led to a $50,000 bonus for some local teachers. Whether Louisiana gave up too much, including tax breaks that could be worth as much as $10 billion, and the use of public land for a privately owned project, won't be answered for years. Officials are quick to say that whatever comes out of it will be better than mostly fallow farmland that was there. Governor Landry was so pleased with the deal that he codified the process with an executive order called Louisiana Lightning Speed to attract other projects. Amazon already has plans for a $12 billion data center in the state's northwest corner. Quote, "How did Mark Zuckerberg build a successful company?" Mr. Landry said in an interview. "He didn't do it by going out there and telling everybody what he was doing, what his game plan was." Fortunes from the project, however, have been unequally distributed. In Delhi, a poor and majority black town 10 minutes from the Hyperion site, some residents have seen their rents spike because construction workers need homes. Tracy Williams, who is pictured here in the article, 41, was evicted from her trailer park last July when her landlord raised the rent to $1,495 from $250 per month. She could not afford to relocate her trailer with only a month's notice, so she and her family watched as a machine dismantled their home, cut it into pieces, and crushed it like a can, she said. For the next 3 weeks, she and her 4 children slept in a car. "That was my home for over a decade," she said. "Not everyone is making Meta money." Part 1, Heaven and Earth. A year before Meta broke ground for Hyperion on a stretch of mostly abandoned rice and soybean farms, Louisiana wasn't even among the states competing for the project. It was January 2024, about a year after OpenAI started the artificial intelligence boom with its ChatGPT chatbot. Meta wanted to build one of the planet's biggest data center complexes and was looking for a state willing to make a deal. 3 Meta employees gathered at Copper Vine, a bistro in downtown New Orleans, to listen to a pitch for the Richland Parish site. On the other side of the table were executives from Entergy. Over red wine and crab bisque in a private dining room, Philip May, Entergy's chief executive, proposed Louisiana as a dark horse contender to sites in Arkansas and Mississippi. His company could provide the power, he said, and the state owned the perfect land, 1,440 acres in Richland Parish, sitting mostly vacant, that Louisiana had acquired in 2006 for a failed attempt to lure a Toyota plant. The state knew Meta could also buy at least 2,300 more acres nearby. The area badly needed development. As global trade agreements bit into the profits of local farms, thousands of jobless residents left. The state pitched other big companies on opening factories there, Jaguar, Mercedes, Hyundai, Daimler Chrysler, John Deere, and Caterpillar, but all went elsewhere. Meta told Mr. May during their meal that it wasn't considering Louisiana because it lacked what other states were offering, a sales tax exemption on data center equipment. And because its legislature was in a non-fiscal session, it couldn't take up the new tax exemptions until next year. I asked them, if we can get that exemption this year, would we be a contender, Mr. May said. They told me yes. Meta wanted to keep the negotiations as quiet as possible, and the utility executives, followed by state officials, agreed that was the best way to ensure potential opponents didn't derail talks. No public meetings were held to discuss the project before it was officially unveiled. Meta had other requests too, like sufficient electricity, water, and land. Most important, it told Mr. May they needed to move fast. The data center would be a windfall for Entergy, and Meta would be the largest customer in its 112-year history. And Mr. May knew the governor would be on board, especially to help a part of the state that needed revival. Mr. Landry, an ally of President Trump, won his election partially on the promise of increasing drilling for oil and natural gas in the state. Later that January, Mr. May and a crew of Entergy executives attended an event in Washington where Susan Bourgeois, Louisiana's new Secretary of Economic Development, was sworn in. As she walked off the stage, Ed Jimenez, a vice president from Entergy, was waiting. We have a really, really significant project, and we have a shot, Ms. Bourgeois recalled Mr. Jimenez telling her. But in order to do this, we as a state are going to have to move heaven and earth. Ms. Bourgeois and her team signed non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, with Entergy and Meta to put the deal together. The state had one important request: go bigger. Quote, we told Meta the larger you can make it, the more aggressive we can be to get you what you need, Ms. Bourgeois said. While the project was projected to cost $10 billion, it was always $10 billion with a wink, she said. Meta gave Louisiana an August deadline, 7 months away, for a deal that normally takes years to plan. Meta said the August date was a working target and a suggestion. Everyone involved agreed that it needed to be kept secret. Mr. Landry invited every member of his cabinet who needed to know about the project to a meeting at the governor's mansion. His chief of staff passed around a stack of NDAs, and freshly baked peanut butter cookies. Louisiana has an opportunity for something very, very, very big, the governor told the group, said Ms. Bourgeois and her deputy, Ann Vila. But leaks kill deals. If this leaks and we lose this deal, if I find out it was you, you're fired. Are we clear? Using NDAs between public officials and private companies is legal but raises transparency concerns, experts said. It has become a common practice among tech companies working on data centers. Over 50 government officials have signed NDAs with Mr. Landry's Economic Development Office since his term began in January 2024, according to records obtained by Gulf States Newsroom and Type Investigations and shared with the Times. The practice was not common in the previous governor's term. To seal the Meta deal, the governor's first order of business was the sales tax exemption. Because it was the middle of the legislative session and Meta was asking for quick action, the only option was rewriting a proposed rebate that had already been introduced. The governor's team chose the tax break for fiber optic equipment because it sounded close enough to data centers. Mr. Nelson, the revenue secretary and self-described outspoken critic of tax breaks, was planning to speak against the fiber optic bill. He changed his mind. To do these deals, you have to be competitive with neighboring states, and that's what this bill did, Mr. Nelson said in an interview. Meta also wanted property tax incentives and upgrades to nearby roads. There were no public disclosures of the negotiations. Remarkably, Ms. Bourgeois said, the deal never leaked. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Part 2. Hyperion is revealed. Hyperion was unveiled by state officials in December 2024 as a $10 billion deal, about a fifth of the size of current plans. When construction is finished, the data center is expected to use nearly half of Entergy's energy supply, Mr. May said. Mr. Landry bluntly acknowledged that the deal's secrecy was unconventional, but said state officials had to think like a tech company to secure a project of its size. Transparency is a very interesting word, he said, because what we've seen is people have used the word transparency to basically kill deals like this. Mr. Bourgeois said her team had done what was best for Louisiana. I'll never apologize for putting this state and a parish like that in a position to be able to enjoy the benefits of billions and billions of dollars, she said. One Republican state senator, Jay Morris, a native of Richland Parish, was particularly eager to see Hyperion happen. He co-wrote a bill that helped the state make the deal with Meta, voted yes on the data center tax rebate, and spoke in support of the project to a utility commissioner before the state's power commission voted to approve Entergy's expansion plans. Last September, Mr. Morris, who had signed an NDA with Entergy, sold 300 acres he co-owned near the data center to the energy company, according to property filings. The money Mr. Morris made was not disclosed in the filings, and he declined to provide a figure in an interview. The value of land near where the data center is being built has skyrocketed to more than $50,000 per acre, from $3,000 to $5,000 an acre before the data center was announced, said Sherry Ho, a local real estate appraiser. Mr. Morris's sales were earlier reported by Floodlight, an investigative news outlet. Mr. Morris, 68, confirmed the transaction and said there was no conflict of interest. We wouldn't have any data centers at all if it weren't for those tax incentives. I'm probably more popular now in my district than I've ever been. Part 3. Final Hurdles. Around the same time Mr. Morris sold his land, Meta had a to-do list with 3 big items: power, insurance, and finding someone else to foot the bill. In August 2025, Louisiana's power commissioners voted 4-1 to approve 3 new gas turbines to power the data center. The commission skipped having an independent administrative judge weigh in on whether the project was in the public's best interest, something that is typically done in Louisiana but would have slowed down the project. Legally, the Power Commission could skip that step. Meta promised to pay for the maintenance and operation costs of the new turbines for half their 30-year lifespan. Entergy reserved the right to raise its energy prices for all customers to pay for the rest. Devonte Lewis, a power commissioner who was the lone dissenting vote, said he was nervous about the rushed process. I believe my most important job as a regulator is to trust but verify, he said at that meeting. And the truth is there's lots of things that I just cannot verify at this moment. Local consumer groups say some of the cost of the plants would fall to ratepayers if Meta were to back out. But Brandon Scardigli, an Entergy spokesman, said that its customers were not being put at risk and that Meta would have to pay substantial penalties if it withdrew. He said new power plants could eventually replace the state's aging ones if Meta left. The day the commissioners approved the power plants, Meta registered a legal entity in Delaware called Beignet Investor, named after Louisiana's deep-fried pastry. The entity would allow Meta to transfer most of the project's ownership to a Wall Street partner so it could reduce its own risk. In October 2025, Meta announced a joint venture with Blue Owl, a private credit firm known for lending to risky companies. Started in 2016, the firm had become a $300 billion colossus. Blue Owl put $7 billion into the joint venture, and Meta put $2 billion in addition to several billion it had already spent. Blue Owl sold roughly $27 billion in bonds, one of the largest private bond issues ever, to finance its investment in the project. Among the buyers of those bonds was PIMCO, a bond giant that works with teachers' pension funds. Blue Owl committed to owning Hyperion for the next 24 years, the company said, but Meta could drop out after 4 years. If it did, Meta would still have to make up the difference between whatever debt had not been paid off and what a new tenant or owner was willing to pay. It's impossible to say what that difference could be, but Blue Owl said walking away from the deal would not be a costless decision for Meta. Opponents of the deal say Louisiana is putting too much faith in Meta to stick with the project. If Mark loses interest in this, we're gone. They're gone, said Susan Miller, a lawyer for the environmental law firm Earth Justice, which unsuccessfully pushed the State Power Commission to investigate Entergy's deal with Meta. Insurance was one issue that couldn't be entirely solved, so insurers would provide full coverage for Hyperion because it was so no insurers would provide full coverage for Hyperion because it was so big and was being built in a floodplain, according to 3 people who were familiar with the talks but not allowed to discuss them publicly. One insurance executive who declined to cover the project said that to build it in a floodplain, it's crazy. Project planners cobbled together insurance to cover up to $4 billion, according to investor documents. But if a natural disaster shuts down the data center for over 2 years, Meta can walk away without paying the difference in what's owed on its lease, according to investor documents and a Blue Owl spokesperson. Meta and Blue Owl dismissed concerns over insurance. Tornadoes, they said, are a bigger risk than flooding, and the 2 companies decided that full coverage wasn't necessary. The last significant flooding in the area was 2016, and a disastrous flood hit in 1927. There is no scenario, Blue Owl said in a statement, in which such a massive project could face destruction from a natural catastrophe. To imply that the project is underinsured, the company said, is simply false. The project keeps getting bigger. In October, Meta said Hyperion would become a $30 billion project. This month, after Entergy announced it was building 10 gas turbines instead of 3 at an estimated cost of $14 billion, Meta said the project would total $50 billion. Blue Owl is not funding the latest expansion. While Meta would not say where the additional funding was coming from, it said it expected to spend up to $145 billion company-wide, much of it on AI, this year. Part 4. The Boom in Northeast Louisiana. Along a strip of one-lane highway dotted by cottonwood trees, trailer parks, and Baptist churches, the data center site, a mile wide and more than 5 miles long, stretches beyond eyesight. A bumper-to-bumper line of trucks weaves through towns so small they don't have traffic lights, so Meta is paying for dozens of off-duty sheriff's officers to monitor roads. The construction changed Richland Parish overnight, with 6,000 temporary workers pouring into a parish of 20,000 people. Hourly pay for contract workers is high, around $40 an hour, and some landowners have seen their property values soar tenfold. Hotel rooms in Monroe, the largest nearby city with an airport, are going for $400 per night. Residents have largely welcomed the boom, more excited about the new opportunities than concerned about the secrecy surrounding the deal. For 20 years, the parish tried and failed to land multi-million-dollar economic projects to help its residents, who are on average among the poorest in the state. Meta's project is bigger than all of them combined. Quote, "Nobody picked up the phone and asked us if we wanted this," said Justin Clark, a pastor in the nearby town of Rayville, but the reality is this is an opportunity. Fewer young people are leaving, and some are even returning after years away. Because the data center's construction will last at least 4 years, contractors are hiring locally if they can before bringing in workers from other states. Pastor Clark said it reminded him of a Bible verse from the book of Matthew. The harvest is abundant, but the workers are few. Rob Cleveland, the president of the Northeast Louisiana Economic Alliance, a local economic development group, said he had never seen anything like Meta's project in his 20 years of working in the field. "Every economic indicator in the parish is improving," Mr. Cleveland said. Mr. Landry is hoping to replicate the scene in other parts of Louisiana, creating a Silicon Bayou. While Meta's data centers will create 1,000 permanent jobs, construction on the other data centers could last for years to come, he said. People who claim the state is losing tax revenue forget that there was zero up there. 0 from 0 leaves 0, Mr. Landry said, and before Meta, there was 0. In May, the joint venture that controls Hyperion paid its first sales tax payment of $22.4 million, making it the parish's largest taxpayer. Meta plans to spend $1 billion to upgrade local infrastructure and $5 million on job training at a nearby community college. And local teachers got those big bonuses. That money hasn't trickled down to people like Ms. Williams, who lost her home. The trailer park she lived in was one of at least 5 in Richland Parish to be remade for data center workers, most of whom live in converted man camps, some renovated with new basketball courts and soccer fields. Rents are so high that Ms. Williams moved her family to another parish, forcing her to find new work and schools for her children. Some of her neighbors found jobs working for Meta, but others left for good. Jesse Washington, Delhi's mayor, said the data center had brought once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but also greed. He wondered, when the construction is done in a few years and all the temporary workers are gone, what will be left of the town? Nobody really has the answer, Mr. Washington said. The next headline in today's front page reads, Congress budgeted billions for big transit projects. Trump isn't spending it. And there's a picture on the page of Boston's Green Line, the oldest subway system in North America, by Emily Badger and Alicia Parlapiano. For decades, the federal government has funneled big-ticket grants to local communities to help them take on ambitious construction projects to expand public transit. The grants, sometimes in the billions of dollars, have funded new railroad tracks, train stations, and roads rebuilt for modern bus service. Today, they're funding extensions of the 2nd Avenue subway in New York and the Red Line in Chicago, as well as the Gateway Tunnel under the Hudson River and bus infrastructure in Indianapolis and San Antonio. But since President Trump returned to office, the Federal Transit Administration has not signed a single new agreement under the program, known as capital investment grants. Large projects ready to enter the final phase of the program's years-long pipeline have stalled there. The administration also tried halting payments to the New York and Chicago projects, forcing courts to intervene. As a number of pending projects builds up, so has anxiety about the federal government's support for major transit infrastructure. Money that Congress designated for that purpose is accumulating too. More than $7 billion hasn't been obligated to any project. It's hard to look at the last year and see anything other than a deliberate slowdown of these grants, said Steve Davis, director of the advocacy group Transportation for America. The program illustrates a subtler tactic in how the Trump administration is managing federal funds, not just terminating grants as it did in droves last year, but quietly declining to give out new ones. And there's a chart here that is showing new capital investment grants agreements signed. And the Trump administration has signed no new agreements for the major transit grant program. The chart shows capital investment grant agreements from Obama administration, the first Trump administration, and the Biden administration, all with numbers from 1 to 11 of grant agreements signed, and then shows in 2025 and 2026 that Trump has signed 0 of these agreements. The absence of action is harder to trace and harder for communities to contest. More than a dozen transit agencies and local governments seeking grants declined interviews or would not comment about the program, amid fears that a fleeting phrase could anger the administration with millions of dollars on the line. The Department of Transportation, which includes the transit agency, said in a statement that projects were working their way through the multi-stage grant process required by law. And the agency noted that it has supported transit in other ways, including with funds to World Cup host cities and with oversight pushing transit agencies to lower crime. As the administration tries to wrest more control from Congress over federal spending, the potential consequences for infrastructure grants are acute. Delays compound rising construction costs that outpace overall inflation. Without the certainty of federal funding, it's harder for communities to pursue bonds and other financing for big projects. And any unspent grant money is something tangible, not built. A subway station without elevators for accessibility, a bus line without dedicated lanes for faster travel, a commuter rail that can't carry enough trains. Quote, "It's just a little bit anathema to me that you would have a program that isn't getting the money to the projects," said Derek Miller, the president and CEO of the Salt Lake Chamber in Utah, who also worked in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in the U.S. House in the 2000s. And there are pictures of the Front Runner commuter trail line in Utah. And Utah is up against a deadline to host the 2034 Olympics. That may sound far off, Mr. Miller said, but the state needs to start on infrastructure next year. And the top priority is the Front Runner 2X project, now in the pipeline, seeking a $2.4 billion grant. It would add parallel track sections of an 83-mile-long commuter rail, enabling more trains for more frequent service and more riders. It's a head-scratcher, Mr. Miller said of the slow process. Just no way local projects can be built alone. It's not unusual for an administration to complete few of these grant agreements in its first year. The Biden administration signed 6 in its final weeks in office, clearing the decks as outgoing officials often do. But people who follow the program say the drought has grown more conspicuous. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Quote, "The concern here is that we're 18 months without a signed agreement," said Ward McCarriger, the Vice President for Government Affairs and Advocacy for the American Public Transportation Association. And 10 projects pursuing grants have already have all their funding ready in the FTA's internal accounting, he noted, including $375 million for bus rapid transit service in Charleston, South Carolina, and $150 million each for bus projects in Los Angeles and Columbus, Ohio. Communities can't count on that money, though, until the FTA reviews engineering plans, environmental assessments, ridership and cost data, and local funding commitments. Projects spend years in that review, some never make it to the end, and no money is guaranteed until an agreement is signed. Smaller communities would be hurt most by delays or grants that never materialize, said Yona Freemark, a researcher at the Urban Institute. They may not have dedicated taxes to fund transit or state programs to step in. Of the 46 projects in the pipeline, most aren't trying to dig a tunnel under a major river. They're seeking $50 million to $150 million for bus rapid transit. There's just no way that local communities can afford these changes by themselves, said Natalie Fani Gonzalez, the county council president in Montgomery County, Maryland, in the Washington suburbs. The county is seeking $150 million toward a nearly $200 million project to revamp Veers Mill Road, a wide throughway that has been surrounded over the years by homes, schools, and businesses. Imagine a highway in the heart of a neighborhood, Ms. Fani Gonzalez said. The corridor is dotted with makeshift memorials to pedestrians who have died. The county wants to put in a bus rapid transit line with dedicated bus lanes, boarding stations, and priority signals, as well as better sidewalks and cycling access. The county has been expecting a grant by the end of the fiscal year on September 30th, Ms. Fani Gonzalez said. For the largest projects in the program, proponents argue that the federal government has an interest in major infrastructure in the nation's economic engines. Quote, "Greater Boston is what it is today because of the federal partnerships on mega projects," said Tom Ryan, a senior advisor at A Better City, a Greater Boston business organization. The federal government, through other programs, helped fund the Big Dig that transformed downtown Boston and the cleanup of Boston Harbor. Today, the region wants to modernize the oldest subway system in North America, the Green Line on the Boston T. Some sections date to 1897 and the track signals to 1915. 25 stations aren't fully accessible. The Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority has begun to order a new generation of trains for the line, but much of the system needs updating to support them. It's asking the federal government to contribute about $2 billion toward a roughly $4 billion investment to be paid over many years. Such large projects must go through a final engineering phase of the grant pipeline, and when the FTA admits projects to that phase, it signals the maximum amount of the program would likely fund. The Boston project, along with Utah's and a light rail project in Los Angeles, has been waiting at that gate. Skepticism at the top. There are other signs of the administration's disregard for these grants. even if it can't end a program Congress created. The first Trump administration proposed eliminating its funding at one point. Congress funded it anyways. The grants then made an appearance in Project 2025 as a poor use of funds. Quote, in terms of bang for your buck, these projects are a lot more expensive than is necessary, and they provide a form of transportation that is increasingly obsolete, said Diana Furchtgott-Roth, a transportation official in the first Trump administration who wrote the Project 2025 chapter on transportation. These projects rely on fixed infrastructure, she said, in a world with rideshare apps, e-bikes, bike share systems, and electric scooters, and even autonomous cars. The Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, also released an early memo proposing to prioritize transportation funding to communities with high rates of marriages and births, naming one program in particular, Capital Investment Grants. Then last fall, the White House Budget Director, Russell Vought, announced he was freezing payments to New York for the Gateway Tunnel and 2nd Avenue subway for potentially violating new rules on disadvantaged business contractors. 2 days later, he was doing the same with the Chicago Transit Authority. It's very hard to ignore what happened when Gateway, the 2nd Avenue subway, and Chicago got their money cut off, said Peter Rogoff, a former FTA administrator and former head of Sound Transit in Seattle. What he takes from that, this grant program has a very special place in their heart, and it's probably not a good place. Judges later ordered the administration to resume funding, but Mr. Vaught's Office of Management and Budget, which doles out appropriated money to agencies, has continued to make unusual moves with the program. Of its nearly $7.9 billion in available resources, the Budget Office has designated more than $5.2 billion for next fiscal year, effectively putting it out of reach should the FTA want to use it to sign a grant today. Quote, I've never seen a situation where the FTA says, oh, we don't need $5 billion because we're not going to have projects ready for that, said Sarah Klein, a transportation consultant who earlier worked on transit legislation in the Senate Banking Committee. That just doesn't happen. When the new fiscal year begins August 1st, the White House Budget Office could simply push that money into the future again. The office did not respond to questions about how it has handled the program. While communities wait, voters' expectations are at stake too. In 2024, voters around Columbus passed a sales tax increase to help fund an $8 billion transportation plan called Link US, designed around bus rapid transit. I tell people in Columbus that you will know Columbus before and after Link US, said Shannon Hardin, the Columbus City Council president. It will literally transform how folks not just get around, but how this city grows. When voters opted to raise their own taxes in tight times to do it, he said, it was with the expectation that the federal government would be there too. The next article on today's front page reads, most ovarian cancer isn't, and that fact can save lives. The vast majority of cases begin in the fallopian tubes, and removing them can reduce the risk by nearly 80%. By Gina Colada. Kira Wynn will do almost anything to avoid ovarian cancer, which killed her mother. Quote, my mom thought she'd pulled a muscle in her side, Ms. Wynn said. Her mother's doctor, she added, told her to do physical therapy. As is often the case with ovarian cancer, Ms. Wynn's mother's disease was already at an advanced stage when she was diagnosed. She died 10 months later. Genetic tests could not pinpoint a mutation that would reveal whether Ms. Wynn was at risk for ovarian cancer too. So Ms. Wynn, 37, had a consultation with Dr. Rebecca Stone, a gynecological oncologist at Johns Hopkins Medicine. What she heard was not what she expected. Ovarian cancer, Dr. Stone told her, is a misnomer. Nearly all ovarian cancers, and nearly all fatal ovarian cancers, are actually cancers of the fallopian tubes. The 20% or so that start in the ovaries are different, Dr. Stone said, and can usually be cured. Women who have their tubes, the gummy worm-shaped ducts that carry eggs from the ovaries to the uterus, removed, reduce their chances of getting ovarian cancer by nearly 80%. It's a 5-minute operation and can be done as part of nearly any abdominal surgery, including a hysterectomy, tubal ligation, gallbladder surgery, and hernia repair. Yet no doctor, Ms. Wynne said, had ever mentioned fallopian tube removal to her. That's not surprising, Dr. Stone said, because most doctors and the public do not know about this approach, even though professional groups like the American Cancer Society, the American College of Surgeons, and the European Society of Gynecological Oncology have recently issued statements encouraging doctors to offer tube removal at the time of other abdominal surgeries. And there's a picture of Dr. Rebecca Stone, a gynecological oncologist at Johns Hopkins. The American Cancer Society is now working on a national campaign to make more women and doctors aware that tube removal can help prevent most ovarian cancers. The group plans to begin the campaign next year, said Anne Reynolds-Doer, a spokeswoman. Women have, on average, a 1.1% risk of being diagnosed with ovarian cancer, among the most deadly of all cancers. Screening to find it early does not work. Death rates do not budge. Ultrasound, blood tests, and advanced imaging have all failed. And most of the 20,000 women a year who receive a diagnosis of ovarian cancer have no known risk factors. By the time they find out why they have vague symptoms like bloating and abdominal pain, the cancer is spread throughout their body. Surgery and chemotherapy, the standard treatments, are unlikely to cure them. The tumors start as microscopic specks of cancer cells that spill out of the wide end of the fallopian tube that is nestled against an ovary. They seed the ovary and abdomen where they grow and become lethal. Dr. Kara Long, an ovarian cancer specialist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, likens these tiny cancer cells to dust coming up from a rug and floating through the room. Dr. Stone says they're like dandruff drifting down to a person's shoulders. That discovery, Dr. Long said, was a light bulb moment for us. It explained why early diagnosis so often failed. Those tiny cells do not show up on ultrasound or other imaging. But the finding did not seem to penetrate the medical community. How do you take a critical discovery, one of the most critical discoveries in my lifetime, and move it to a standard of care? Dr. Stone asked. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 29th, 2026 issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been David Frothingham. Thank you for listening.